Hello, friends. How are you doing? Today, we're going to talk about my games of the year that came out a few days ago. I'm recording this right after the other one, but a few days ago in Channel Time, I released my albums of the year that came out. So if you're interested in music, if you want to hear my thoughts on music that came out this year, then definitely go watch that. I'm still kind of disappointed that I didn't get any video out relating to music aside from the Goldfish one this year. But I'm working on the Queens of the Stone Age one, and that'll be out soon. And for those of you who prefer me talking about games exclusively, well, too bad. So, anyway, before we get going, I want to mention some games that I didn't play but really want to. Either because I just couldn't afford it or I don't have the capability to play it, which is the case for two of the three of these, or I just didn't get around to it, right? But anyway, I have three that I want to say here, and that being, I didn't get to play Hollow Knight, and I really want to. That's a game that I think I would really enjoy. I bought it, I own it, but it just does not run on a MacBook Pro particularly well. So that's something that I'm gonna have to either wait until a release on the Switch or wait until I get a PC to play it that can run it. So until which point I cannot play it, but I'm fairly confident that I will enjoy it. So if I was able to play it this year, it probably would have at least made honorable mentions, if not been on the list itself. Another one is Cuphead. I honestly don't know whether I would enjoy Cuphead or not, because I think it... run and guns have never been like huge my thing, but I think there are some things that Cuphead does that I would really, really enjoy. Not even counting the art style and the music. I'm talking just from pure game design standpoint. I think there are things that it does that I would enjoy, but it's only available on Xbox One and PC, and I don't have either of those, so can't really get it. Now, can I? And the last one is ARMS. It's a game that Nintendo released on the Switch that kind of went over most people's heads, just because of its focus on motion controls, which I think a lot of people they're kind of like, I don't like this whole motion control thing that much anymore. I'm kind of sick of it. But that said, there's a lot of people that are talking great things about it, and from what I understand, most people that have played ARMS really enjoy it. It's just a matter of like people deciding to put the money in to get it, and I fall in that camp. So I just couldn't, I can only spend money on so many things. I am a poor college student with debt, and therefore cannot spend my money on every single game that came out this year, and that happened to be one of them. So there you go. Now, I also want to mention three games that came out that I think are worthy of mentioning or worthy of being in someone's list that just, for whatever reason did not quite make it because there are games that I liked more. So I want to give a shout out to Neo, which is a game that I want to play more of, but I got to kind of a brick wall kind of situation where I'm just not good enough at the game. And me not being good at it because I like having shields doesn't mean that it's not a fantastic game. I like what it does with the different stances, because the stances actually have some sort of degree of impact on what's going on. It's not this sort of meaningless choice that you have to make. It really seriously does affect combat in a major way, arguably more so than Bloodborne's trick weapons. So that I really enjoyed. I also like how it has a bit of a different feel than Dark Souls, because I think there are a lot of times when a game wants to make a game that's Souls-like or like Dark Souls, they just kind of copy things without really considering how it benefits their vision of what this game should be or shouldn't be. So I think Neo does a lot of stuff that's unique to it, that makes it feel distinctly different from Dark Souls, which is something that even something like Salt and Sanctuary as a 2D game, which I mentioned last year, it didn't do. It felt like a Dark Souls game in a lot of ways. So Neo did a great job, but unlike last year, I think there was a lot of fantastic games that came out this year. So Neo, which maybe would have made the list last year, just couldn't make the list this time. I also want to mention Thumper, which came out on the Switch this year. It's a game that released last year and I didn't play last year, and I wish I did, but I love having it on the Switch. I love having it portably, and it's a game that I keep coming back to because it's just insanely trippy in terms of the music and audio-visual experience there, but it's also a very tricky and precise rhythm game that demands a lot of the player, and when you mess up, it's not a situation where it's like, you know what's coming, and you have to react to it. and you learn these patterns and you figure out what you need to do, and you get into a sort of rhythm, you get into a sort of groove, and it's something that I really, really enjoyed and captivated a lot of my time this year. In fact, it ate up more of my time than Breath of the Wild, which is not in here because it's not as good as people are saying it is. Similarly, Mario Odyssey isn't here because it's not as good as people are saying it is. Let's move on to the last honorable mention, Snipper Clips, this cute as hell game that came out just as the Switch launched, and I bought it and I played it with some friends, and everyone I played it with was like, this is the most adorable thing I've experienced in many time since the last time I petted a puppy or something like that. It's just that adorable. When you like crouch, the little faces like go down like, yeah, I'm gonna crouch, I'm trying real hard. It's so good. I love it. The visuals in this game sell it so hard because it's goofy, right? It's kind of slippery on the controls, right? You know, it's not precise by any means, but it's fun and stupid, which is why it works. I freaking love it. And there are a lot of puzzles in here that you can do in multiple different ways, and you have to think about different approaches to take. And sometimes there are times when I've solved puzzles in ridiculously overly complicated ways, when in reality the solution was much easier. I'm thinking of an instance where instead of cutting myself into a gear to spin a gear, I made a little chisel guide on myself and then spun around the gear itself to turn it, which was very unintuitive and not worth it. But that was the way I did it, and it was possible to do, and it worked. Yeah, things like that are just really fun. And it's an instance where something can be goofy just through, not being the most precise experience, right? When you jump, there's a little slide and slip to it, but it's not like you feel like you're not in control. It's just a goofy experience. So easily the most stupid fun I've had this entire year. Fantastic game. So now let's move on to the actual entries on the list. Whoa, look at that. And the number 5 on here, I don't even freaking own. That's crazy, right? But as soon as I have the money, I will buy it. But I don't have the money, so I'm not going to buy it. But earlier this year, now, if you didn't know, story time, I'm an RA at my college, and I supervise a bunch of people that live here to make sure they don't do stuff that's stupid. But my next door neighbor at the time, he and a good friend of his who also lived on the floor got together and played horror games a lot, right? They got together because they wanted to be spooked, and they liked playing games like that, and it was late at night, and they had these cool little speakers that shot right at them, so when there was a little jump scare kind of situation, it went boom, and you're like, whoa, what's going on? And it really immersed you in the experience in a way that wouldn't be possible otherwise, and it was a good time. And one game that they played was Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. And I'm not a Resident Evil fan. I've never really had interest in the Resident Evil games, but it's something that I will get into, whenever I feel like it. Maybe I'll pick up Resi 4 at some point, or who knows, right? But Resi 7, it just happened to be the game that they were playing. They were like, Matt, come over and play some spooky games, and I've done it before. And Resident Evil 7 is just a really, really captivating experience. It's a game that every move that you make makes you double take and look around, and you're really worried about stuff that's going to happen around you because you don't know where these people are and they're going to come and get you. The one scene that really stands out to me in this game as being particularly great was I think it's one of the first boss fights in the game, but it's this scene where there's the old guy that lives in the house and was one of the people who's trying to kill you. He gets in the car, right? There's this whole thing in the car, and he's gonna run over you, and it's crazy because there's a lot of different approaches you can take. So originally he is in the car, right, and he's gonna get you or whatever, and then eventually he gets out of the car, and you got to get in the car and then do some crazy. I don't remember the full situation, but the cool thing about it is it was It felt like kind of scripted, right? Because like when you get in, certain things happen, but it wasn't a thing where it's like you had to do the one thing and that led to the end of the boss battle. It really felt like every path or option that the player could take was considered for in this boss battle. And the scripted kind of experiences that happen, it really made the characters feel more alive and part of the experience instead of just being like a set of systems that happen during this boss fight, right? So I think in terms of being a horror game, I think Resident Evil 7 really succeeded in that regard because of its use of sort of semi-scripted events to make you feel like you don't have full control over the situation, and I think it did that particularly well, and I really enjoyed my time with it, and I do want to pick it up myself and enjoy it again at some point. So that's my number 5. Number 4 is not Mario Odyssey. Instead, it's A Hat in Time, because that game is fantastic. Now, I made this video this year called 3D Mario Games Critique and Comparison, and, it's not the best thing I've ever made, and I do believe that there are some problems that I have with that video, but if I don't regret some things from a video a few months later, then that means I'm not improving. So take that with a grain of salt, really. But the one thing that I said there was that one of the biggest issues that we've had with Mario games, the 3D Mario games, is this mission-based structure. Because what happens is in something like Mario 64, you go in, you pick a mission, but then you can get a star for some completely different mission, but not all the stars. So it just kind of is weirdly inconsistent and confusing, especially to someone that, isn't super familiar with video games. Mario's this series that's supposed to be super accessible, right? And Mario 64 was far from it. And they did do some good job at making certain things accessible, like, say, the camera, right? But, with that, it was one area that I thought was a severe weakness with the game. In something like Mario Sunshine, what they did is only in circumstances where you basically broke the game could you get a star other than the one that was intended for that mission, because it felt like you were arriving at this world which had similar level design, but it felt like you were arriving there at a different day or time or whatever. The main issue with that being is that there are certain inconsistencies. So if you're trying to get like blue coins or secret stars or 100 coin stars, you can only pick a specific mission to do that because the location of coins and stuff would change throughout these missions, right? In Galaxy, it kind of felt like you were choosing a mission, but it really just kind of took you to a different level most of the time. And so it was kind of this sort of 3D world, predecessor to 3D world, in that every level was unique while trying to disguise it as the 64 Sunshine approach, which actually I think I kind of like Galaxy more than Odyssey. The more I think about it, but 3D World is still my favorite. Anyway, why do I bring all this up? Because I think the cool thing with A Hat in Time is that every single area that you choose takes a different approach, but it kind of does the best version of that approach every time. And it feels like these worlds that were crafted were designed with a particular, approach to mission design in mind. So, for example, the first world is Mafia Town, where it's the Sunshine approach, where when you arrive for a mission, it feels like you're arriving at a different time or place. But there are consistencies throughout. So you can go and open secret safes, for example, any mission you want, as long as you can actually access the safe, as long as the ground isn't freaking lava like it is in one of the missions. Similarly, there are these time rifts, which are basically like the secret areas from Sunshine, and you can access them in any mission you want. It doesn't matter. And I think touches like that are really nice, because it's no longer you have to figure out what mission you have to go to do this bonus thing that you might want to do. There's a world where it's kind of more like Banjo-Kazooie. It just throws you in, you get everything all in the one experience. There's another world where it's these like competing movie studios, and the way the missions are laid out, it's kind of like you're making movies with each of these movie studios, because both of them contracted you to help them make a movie. So the first one is just the introductory mission, right? Is you're like going through both of them as they're sort of happening. But then the second mission, is like in the train as you're trying to solve a mystery, and then that becomes a movie, and the third missions the other so it's like really cool how that's set up. So I think each of the worlds kind of taking a different approach to mission design, and not only adds more variety to the experience, but it also, does the best version of those approaches. So in that way, the game really is a love letter to these 90s, early 2000s 3D platformers, and it does it really well. The other thing I want to mention is that in Mario Odyssey, like, the control's really loose, right? And it works when you're kind of going about the overworld to get the moons that are, arguably tedious to get and not very enjoyable. But for some, they're enjoyable. And I think the loose controls are part of that, because it's just fun to, run down a hill and speed up as you go down, or slow down as you run up a hill, or use momentum as you roll in with the ball, right? The problem is when you get into like a precise platforming environment, it doesn't work as well. And so these secret areas, which are in the place where you like hit the hat door and go in, was like arguably my favorite, the best part of the game, because it actually tests your platforming, is sloppier than something like 3D World because of how loose this movement is. Where in Hat in Time, it kind of finds this really good balance of movement that feels fun to like explore worlds in, and is like fun and exciting while still being incredibly precise. And the best example is the dive, right? The dive in Sunshine is this loose thing where you just go boom, and then you like slide across, and it's like if you jump up, then you're going to keep jumping forward, and it's this really hard thing to master precise platforming with. In A Hat in Time, the dive is a straight shot forward, and then you plop down, and you don't move, and then you jump straight up when you jump afterwards. So it's no longer this momentum-based thing, but it still feels natural to use when you're just trying to get around a world and have fun. So they did a really good job with the movement in A Hat in Time, I think. So anyway, I really like that game, and it's the best 3D platformer that came out this year. Good stuff. Let's move on to the best Nintendo game that came out this year, that being Splatoon 2. And this is an interesting one because the first Splatoon was fantastic, but there's sort of differences between 1 and 2 that have kind of divided the Splatoon community in some ways. Obviously there are people that are just going to eat up the new game regardless of what it is and not think about it, but there are a lot of people that have gone back to Splatoon 1 because they prefer what Splatoon 1 does that Splatoon 2 doesn't do. Now, I'm going to make a video about this, most likely. It's one of the ideas I threw out on my second channel. I have this video. It's like, here's a bunch of video ideas. What do you want to see? But it's this idea that basically I want to compare the map design between these two games, how the movement, the controls, that kind of stuff, and what the games focus on over the other. I personally prefer Splatoon 2 because back in Splatoon 1, I wanted to focus on the ranked modes because I found them more competitive and more interesting, despite being kind of like twists on the conventional first-person shooter, game modes like King of the Hill or Capture the Flag or whatever. And Splatoon 2, balances the game around those ranked modes more than it balances the game around Turf War, which is, I think, one of the things that is kind of controversial about Splatoon 2. But for me personally, I enjoy that, and I really like the new weapons that are added. I really like the Brella. I like the new specials. They're much more balanced and fair than the kind of absurd specials from the first game. The single player is a bit more lengthy than the first one, and some of the levels drag on a bit more than I would like, but overall I liked it. And I really liked the Salmon Run mode. That was very good, and it introduced me to a lot of weapons that I wouldn't have used otherwise. So overall, I think it's a really solid package. And I think Nintendo did a really good job with Splatoon 2. I think it did a really good job with the online, even though people, prefer the more conventional room-based approach. I think Nintendo does something interesting with its online. And if you want more on that, then I would highly suggest you watch Lamhoot's video on the original Splatoon and how some of the decisions that actually anger some people are actually sort of like intended by the developers to kind of reinvent the online experience. Because I agree with it. Yeah. So number 2 is What Remains of Edith Finch. It's this, what people would conventionally call a walking simulator, where you walk through this old house and you relive memories of your dead ancestors. But the interesting thing about What Remains of Edith Finch is how when it does use interactivity and gameplay, it uses them to accentuate the narrative point that it wants to make. There are a lot of times with games where they focus on narrative, where the gameplay takes a hit because it needs to focus on its narrative, right? And the big example I can think of is Uncharted, where a lot of people hate the Uncharted games because a lot of the things you do in those games are very bare bones and shallow, but the narrative is still pretty good for what it is. It feels like, like an Indiana Jones kind of movie, but you're ultimately you're just holding a direction on the analog stick, right? The thing that makes Edith Finch so cool is that all of these memories that you relive as your ancestors, they use the controller. They use the controls that you're using to play the game in a way to make things, more interesting, right? And the things that they do with the controls are kind of are used to accentuate the points that the game wants to make. So there's one part where it's one of the first ones where you transform into a bunch of different animals, and I'm kind of being tongue-in-cheek, and I did say I originally was going to make a video about this, but honestly it's kind of stupid, so I'm not going to make a video on this. But in some ways, Edith Finch does transformations better than Mario Odyssey, and I say that just because they don't need freaking button prompts to show up on screen for you to figure out what to do and have this seamless transformation experience. But anyway, all of the animals that you take control of, when you control them, they feel like those animals, and it feels like you're really there in that experience, right? And that doesn't, immersion. But I think the true benefit there is that instead of thinking of it as, I'm holding this controller, what inputs do I need to put on this controller to do the thing that I'm trying to do in the video game? You don't think of it that way. You think of it as, I'm a cat, I need to hunch down before I jump. I'm a snake, I need to slither around. I am a shark, so I need to charge at the otter guy or whatever it is. I don't freaking know, to like eat him. You know what I mean? So it's like the thing, you think of it in those terms. The other thing that this game does, the other example that I'll give is the example that everyone gives, which is the fish chopping cannery level, where basically you're this dude who works at this factory, and all he has to do, it's a very simple job, is grab fish, chop the head off, throw it on the conveyor to the next guy. Grab the fish, chop the head off, next guy. And all you have to do is move the fish to the right, because the, choppy guy just kind of slides down, chops off the head, so you just need to hold it there. And the cool thing about it is that that these people are going to die, right? Because it's the fates of these people. So when you're living this out, you're expecting certain things to happen, but then it doesn't go the way you expect. And that makes things interesting. So with this, you might expect that what happens is his mind wanders and he throws his arm under the thing and chops his arm off or something like that, right? Well, that doesn't happen. But what does happen is his mind does start to wander. And instead of it being you have to just do the fish over and over again, you control the mind wandering while doing the fish thing. And you have to do both at the same time. And the memory becomes far more interesting than the fish. And you want to just live out this memory because it's a cool little game, right? But instead, you just have to keep chopping those fish because the fish get in the way of you living this memory that you want to live. And so it's just really interesting having to multitask and do these things, and you feel it proves the point of this guy whose mind is wandering while having to do this incredibly tedious task, right? And I think it did that very well. I won't say what happens at the end of that memory because play the freaking game yourself. Thank you. Good times, good game. What's number one? I think you know what number one is. I originally was like, I'm not gonna talk about number one. Just watch the video, and then if you if you do like the game after watching part of it, then stop watching the video and play the freaking game, right? But I do have a few things I want to say about The End Is Nigh. It's this fantastic, absolutely fantastic platformer made by Ed McMillan, the guy behind Super Meat Boy, The Binding of Isaac, and Gish, some other crazy Flash games from back in the day, but especially those two. He's working on The Legend of Bumbo right now, which is this weird turn-based thing that kind of feels like Isaac, but is actually a completely different sort of game, so I'm excited about that. But The End is Nigh was the result of them trying to work on this other game and then deciding to take a break. And this break ended up being this crazy, awesome, pseudo open world platformer. Right. And the main point I talk about in the video is how it allows you to basically forge your own path through the completion experience, in that it's not that you need to get 120 stars to complete the game and get your crappy 199 freaking lives at the top by Yoshi. It's that you basically create the experience you want with The End is Nigh. So as you go through these levels at the beginning, there are these like bonus tumor collectibles, and you can get them if you want, and they definitely pay off later on, but you don't have to, and you can kind of craft your own experience through the game that you want, the experience that you want with The End is Nigh. So that's what I talked about in the video, right? But I also want to talk about right now something I didn't talk about in the video, and I want to talk about how freaking amazing this game feels to play. Because in something like Super Meat Boy, it felt precise, right? But I won't lie. There are times when I didn't feel like I was fully there. There was just a few minor situations. Like when you press the run button, for example, it's not a binary thing. It's not when you're holding the run button, you move at X speed. When you're not, you run at X speed. There's this slow acceleration period, right? And in something like Mario, for example, it kind of makes sense because you're not doing something ridiculously precise, and having that little bit of momentum before adds a bit of strategy to what's going on. But in Super Meat Boy, it's this sort of grid-based, blocky kind of platforming game where a lot of times you don't even have that much running space to begin with. So sometimes it didn't feel super precise when doing that. There's also like the sliding down the walls business where it kind of didn't always feel perfect. Especially in some of the later worlds. And there are some of these like a few things where it didn't feel as precise as maybe it could, and that can be chalked down to a number of things. And this is being super, super nitpicky, because at the time, Super Meat Boy is probably one of the most precise platforming games that ever was made, right? But of course, The End is Nigh manages to supersede it, right? Because now everything that you do in The End is Nigh is very much a binary thing, and that helps when you're trying to do things very, very particular and specific, right? So basically, when you're moving left at a consistent speed all of the time, always. When you're moving right, you're always moving right at this consistent speed. When you move left and you want to turn around and go right, you can turn around and go right, and you're going right at that consistent speed all of the time. In something like Mario, for example, it's hard to like jump way out the left and at the peak of your jump, turn around and land back on the platform you're originally on, because there's this a little bit of momentum to it that affects it. But it feels natural and it's perfectly fine. But in something like The End is Nigh, which is, like I said, this sort of grid-based kind of, constructed platformer in this way, that it feels, it's based more on the layout of these like tiles rather than trying to make something that feels alive, right? It's very useful to have that ability to just turn around in the middle and be very, very precise and particular. When you turn around, you know exactly what speed you're going at. When you move, you know what speed you're going at. When you jump, it's going to be the same freaking jump every single time. But you can also, right, when you release the jump, you're going to go down immediately. It's not a situation where you're locked to this crazy jump arc. When you press the jump button, you're jumping. When you release the jump button, you're not jumping. It's that simple. When you're moving left, when you hold right, you're moving right. When you're not holding right, you're not moving right. When that, so on and so forth. And then there's this clipping thing where you like kind of hang off the edge of a platform. And to be fair, probably the only finicky thing in the entire game is that you need to like get used to hanging onto the edge of a ledge by like holding down and right at the same time. And it's very difficult to like jump onto the corner of a ledge, right? Because if you jump too high, then you're going to land on the platform. If you jump too low, then you're going to, miss the edge entirely. And there are like one or two instances where the game demands that you do that, and that can be a bit more tricky than it might be worth. But aside from that, right, this mechanic of grabbing onto the edge of things is easily, very consistent. But then what happens is that the edge becomes a tool that you need to use in the game as well. So you hold right and jump off the edge, and suddenly you're launched to the right, and then launching to the right breaks through blocks, right? Like I said in the video. But if you don't want to do that, then you can just jump straight up, and then your jump is a bit less, boom, momentum, in this direction. Not momentum, but like your shot in this direction, right? So that's a tool that you can use as well, because when you jump up, you have more height. When you launch right, you have less height, but you have more distance. And there are all these crazy things. So it's like you're constantly making decisions as you're going through this, and they're very immediate and very quick decisions that you need to make in order to get through these areas, especially when, there's a thing that happens at the end of the game that I won't spoil, because you should play the game to find out. So, anyway, I freaking love this game. There's a reason why I made a video about it the year it came out, because normally I don't do that or want to do that, because I like to sit on things, and, I don't like making videos because it's like I played this thing and enjoyed it. I want to make videos on a thing because it's like I have this idea for a video that I want to make. I have this argument that I want to make, and The End Is Nigh was just so unique and innovative. Why do I say innovative? Innovative, that I knew what that argument would be, as I got far enough in the game and figured out what I wanted to talk about. So please go watch that video. Even the creators of the game said that it was, fairly accurate to their intent. So that's good. But play the game. That's really all I can say. That's all I got. Those are the games that came out this year that I really, really liked. No, it's not the two games that everyone is saying should be game of the year, because those games should not be game of the year. But hey, that's my opinion. If you enjoyed Breath of the Wild, if you enjoyed Mario Odyssey, then that's fine. That's great. I'm glad you enjoyed them. Because I got some enjoyment out of both of them, but I also, had some real frustrating moments where I was really, really aggravated and annoyed. So I'm glad you didn't have those moments, because ultimately people play games. Nintendo says that people play games to have fun. That's not entirely true. People play games to have memorable experiences. Whether it be, whether it makes you feel sad or angry or happy, in the context of the game. But if people don't play games to not play games, you know what I mean? People don't play games so that way they can be like, I don't like this game, I'm going to stop playing. So the less of those experiences we have, the better, because then we're all enjoying the media that we all universally like together. That's the best way to put it. So, that's all I got. I will see you around. Happy New Year, because this is the last video that's coming out this year. So, Happy New Year. Later.